to some new technologies. So those experiences I have, and the things we are doing from like nanotechnology point of view, they're always long term. They will not be implemented over one night, which means that it will take quite a number of years before they are actually used in the society. And for the sustainability of these things, then we of course need to consider the young generation, because they will give the new ideas, how we can further develop these first findings and so on. So it's a long chain of generations. So, and over the years I have been presenting at schools and different popular scientific events, and my hope is that I will at least inspire few people to continue to do what they believe in. Because one of the most key recommendations which I have is that if you believe in yourself, then you can do great things. So it's not about which type of technology or which innovation is the best route or so on. So that will be my basic aim of this webinar. So during this session, either you can, it's a very informal one, so we don't try to keep any formal restrictions, because we should interact and create network and inspiration. So during the presentation, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat and so on. But at the end, I plan to have a question and answer type of interactive session, so you can freely ask anything you like about my experiences or any question which you have from your point of view. Because at the end, it's always the interaction between the people which makes the new possibilities. So I will start with sharing some slides. Do you have something to add before I?
Just a minute. No, I think yes, I managed to get ourselves on Facebook live streaming, so we're on there now. So welcome to all those who are joining us on Facebook. And yes, I think you can continue. Would you like to share some slides? You know how to do that.
Yes, so I'll.
Maybe you could do a slideshow.
Yeah. So now there should be a slideshow scene. Do you see it?
Yes, yes.
Yes, great. So I have collected some pictures and background things, so because I will tell some of my experiences and stories of what I believe, and basically the innovation routes for the younger generation, which is the focus of this webinar, is that there are so many routes and they should be explored by the youth themselves, because we who have some experiences, we are not as fast to pick up the new ideas like the younger generation. So the main key message with this webinar will be that if you have an idea which you believe in, do it, try it, even though you might get recommendations from older people who have done it before. Then there are always new things which come into play, which makes it maybe some early idea was not relevant at that time, but it may be relevant now. So just to illustrate the creativity of the younger generation, I have a picture of my son here filling water in a bowl. So he has developed a new technique for that. And I will give an example. Maybe you have heard about graphene. So this is a new material which is very revolutionary, and it has many properties, and most of you should have heard about it. because it's not only one or two very nice features in this material. But the basic thing is that this material consists of carbon atoms, and carbon has very nice properties itself. And when you arrange the carbon atoms just in one layer, then you get quantum effects, quantum mechanical effects by the one atomic layer. So when you combine these properties, carbon atom and the quantum effects, then you get a lot of properties. So that's why graphene is so relevant for new development. And it's not only one or two application areas, it's a broad range of application areas. And especially if you happen to be in the science, you have certainly heard about this. If you're working in the society, maybe you have not heard about it as much because it's not yet used into products, but it will come. And for example, graphene has such properties in the electrical characteristics that you can do processors and transistors for making faster communication. So basically, the processors for the computers you're using now, they can be 10 times or 50 times faster than what you're doing today. So then it's very, very relevant for electronics and communications and so on. And you can imagine if you have a computer which is 5 times faster than today, then it will be really, really big difference. So that's in the electronics parts. And then when you look at the different properties, it's also relevant for building composites when you do aeroplanes or other structures of houses and so on. So then you come into the building type of field. So then you shift to another branch and using all the properties, then you have many, many, many different. So it's very relevant for basically all areas in different ways. So I will not go into all the details of that, but this is one of the things which are happening. And when you, in the future, when you come into some innovation avenue, maybe you will be in this field using graphene, or you will use it indirectly. For example, when you develop IT, then you will have the faster electronics, which is made from the graphene. And when you have a problem with your systems, then usually it comes to some material failure. So you always come back to the material properties. So this was just an illustration of what is happening now. And the nice and challenging thing is that when you are developing this, you don't know exactly where it is the best to use. You cannot say that it will be sensor or electronics for computers. This is the best area, because things are still being developed, and still the old traditional materials, they are developing and trying to still be competitive. So whatever innovation route you think you have, it's not certain, but you should continue to believe in your route, not to get stuck into one route. So the graphene will be an example of that. So there are many routes, and many of them will fail. Few of them will succeed in a really nice way. But just to demonstrate, here is one of the Nobel Prize winners when he was presenting about graphene at the conference. So the material got so much attention, and it has so fantastic properties, and the researchers who demonstrated the properties of these ones, they got the Nobel Prize in physics in year 2010. So this is a nice achievement. So there were two guys. So this is Novoselov who's presenting, and the other one was Geim on this picture. And Nobel Prize, that's a very nice discovery, and it can lead to many, many innovations and so on. But in comparison, Geim also got the Ig Nobel Prize. This is a prize which he got year 2000 or something for an achievement which is more or less should not be repeated. So that's another type of prize, but for something which is not very useful. So he got this for the levitating frog. So it was one of the most useless discoveries which he got the prize for. And then 10 years later, he got the Nobel Prize for one of the most possible useful discoveries. But you can imagine how much he must have believed in what he's doing and what he wants to do in order to explore a levitating frog. So that's and I'm not sure how many people believed in what he would do would be useful, but at least he believed in himself, he and one other colleague, to explore this, and then they found out some results, and then they presented this. It did not work out. We are not having levitating frogs, but 10 years later, it was the discovery of the graphene, which he got the prize for, and that is much more useful. So this means that whatever you do, whatever innovation route you have, it might not work out in the beginning, it might not work out at all, but then you go to another avenue, and there you will succeed. So the point is that all these things, also the failures and not planned achievements, they give you experience into to the next level. So it builds up. And also in my case, just to give an example from, I'm not a Nobel Prize category, but we have some experimental results. And here is an image of silicon carbide. And I work with silicon carbide for the growth of it. So then we combine silicon atom and carbon atom, and then we build it to have a layer of silicon carbide. So that's also interesting for some certain type of electronics. But once our processes fail, then more silicon is leaving the surface than carbon. And then we have a carbon layer on the surface. So we would like to grow silicon carbide, but we fail, and then we get a carbon layer, like a graphite, on our material, which is very, very bad from that point of view. But when we made this graphite layer on silicon carbide thinner and thinner, then we got one layer of carbon atoms on top of the surface, which then was graphene. So then suddenly our failed experiments came into relevance for the graphene. So that's how we came into the graphene on silicon carbide with the graphite 20 years ago. And then we made the first layer 2005. And then we have been into this. So, so we are also active in the graphene, but a certain type of graphene. But from the beginning, it was failures of experiments where we got the surfaces got graphitized. And now there is so much interest in this material that we also have. So it was an innovation process which we developed, and now we have reproducible way of making this material, and even have a company, startup company, and so on. So that's how I got into the innovation part more and more from the first phase of the research, and then being into these avenues. And then later on, I got even much more involved. But this was one of the first cases for my personal. But it was a failure from the beginning. And I fail a lot. So for example, I have another example here where I developed a method for making these thick layers of silicon carbide, and that was for some power electronics. And I made my PhD thesis in 1999 on one of these processes. So it was 4 years spent on a PhD thesis to develop this method for making silicon carbide for power electronics. And this is the type of layer which we got. So it was very nice quality and smooth surfaces and so on. But they were not pure enough. And then it was not useful for the power electronics. So the highlight of my thesis was a method which was not useful. So maybe not a failure, but it was not the hope, the outcome we were hoping for. But then a few years later, came one Japanese researchers who said that I would like to have this type of thick layers because that was one of the specific features of our layers. But I want to introduce elements because then I can get light out from this material. And then he was looking for methods to produce this, and that's how we came into collaboration. So Satoshi Kamiyama from Meiju University, he had this idea, and we were good in the growth of the material, so we started collaboration. And now there is light coming out from the silicon carbide using our method. So then a few years later, this innovation of method came into relevance. But from the beginning, it was not successful. But what we did was that we liked the research and we wanted to explore these things. So we enjoyed doing these things. And just to elaborate on the difference and what will happen, because you have not seen so much of the things which were maybe 30 years ago, depending on if you're the younger attendee of this webinar. But then some 30 years ago, when you had the first processors for making computing and so on, then you had a big facility. So it was almost like a small room to do some simple computation. So this is a picture of one of the first computers which I took somewhere. So this is the size of it. It's a small house which has less memory than in your calculator. And then over time, you had the transistor and processors which are now developed. And in your computer and other processors, you have the small integrated circuits which can do fantastic things. And they are much more powerful. So just in a 10, 20, 30 years, it has been a revolution in change of what is happening. So this is the part we are in. And if you can imagine, how will it be 10 years from now? What will things look like? Then we can not even imagine it because there will be so many new things, innovation routes, which are possible to use these properties and develop the technologies. So we are in like a dynamic evolution of these things. So whatever is the route you will be taking, it's not rigid, it's not decided. So it would vary a lot over the time in the coming years. And this is one of my old mobile phones. And if you compare with the mobile phones you have today, and some of you are probably watching this from your mobile phone, and then you have a connection and you are doing that using the phone to do other things. But just a few years ago, the only purpose of the mobile phone was to make calls. And that was the only thing which was possible with it. But if you compare the features you have today and the communication possibilities with the mobile phones, and then if you imagine 5, 10 years, what can they do? Then you see what type of future you have, which will be active in. So this was one of my old mobile phones. And of course, these things do not take time. So this is our turtle. And whatever you do, things will take time. And it's not a matter of months, it's a matter of years, even decades. And this is the natural habit of any new thing, that it will take a long time before it is mature enough to be used. And you cannot make fantastic things in very fast. So whatever you do, you plan that it will take very long time. And with the turtle, you know, they are not very super fast, but they travel a little bit all the time, and then they come to their destination. So over a long time, you will reach your destination. And if you're not super fast, then you can adjust all the time to go to the right direction which you would like to head for. If you would be super fast, you would maybe do a lot of this and lose energy. And along the way, of course, you get more experience from other fields and so on. So then you get other ideas which makes that, oh, maybe this is what I should do with this, and so on. So this is the example of turtle. And sometimes it's actually better that you have experiences of different things before you come to your real case, that maybe you need these experiences in order to do the right things later on, like 10 years from now or 20 years from now, that you make the right decisions because you had the experience from previously of doing failures, basically, or things like that. So this is why it's good that things take long time. And I have another personal example in a total field. For example, when you're young, you want to be a rock star, and you are very dynamic and do all these things and write songs and so on. But if you imagine the bands which are available now, if you're very intense when you're young and doing these things, maybe you will burn out, maybe you will lose your interest because it's so intense that you get overwhelmed by these things. And now I think that it's not very easy to make a band which will survive 40 years. And if you compare the lyrics or so on, which you would write, and I play guitar myself, this is not me, but I have music interest, so that's why I take this example. But if I would write written lyrics and made songs 30 years ago, then maybe it would be more about beer and going to the bar and things like that. But when you get older, you get more experiences, and you can still have the emotion. Like this is another guitarist, but he's much older than the previous one. So then you can still have the emotions and do more impact if you can manage to stay along over a longer time. So the key message here is that not try to do too many things so you get burned out and you do move in different ways where it's not useful. Try to be more sensible, plan over a longer time, because then it will be better. And like in my music, the songs I make, they are much more mature and I have better lyrics than I did 30 years ago. So my personal hope in this is that I will have more impact now than I had before. So this is another example of how it's good to move ahead slowly, because you don't know what will be happening. And another example which you see today about innovation roots, here is an LED. You can buy this in the shops now. So it's a white LED. So when you change your light bulbs and so on, then you have new type of lighting and this is a technology which is now readily available. You can buy this in the shops. And if you go back a few years, then you had the light bulb. And that was invented many, many years ago. And it works that you have a wire which gets hot. And when it's hot, it cools itself by emitting light. And 5% of that one is in the visible region. So that's the light bulb function. And in LED, because it's a different type of light emission mechanism, then you can have 50% of 50% coming out from this light source. So it's another technology, and now it's used worldwide. And this energy savings here, they are tremendous. So that's why this is so fantastic to see this, but it was many years. But the background of this material, of this light emission, the LED, is a small material combination. When you do these things and give electricity to it, you have light coming out of it. And this did not happen overnight. It took a long time. But the basic mechanism is that you create areas where you have positive and negative charges in a material. And when they meet, they release energy as light. So it's not heat which is transformed, it's a direct mechanism. So I will not go into the details, but this is the reason why this is much more efficient. And like in the lighting today, it's very focused. It's not as broad as the light bulb. So this is a very simple description of how you can do this tremendous energy savings from the light bulb to the LEDs, which are used today. But from the beginning, it was researchers who made the material, and they made discoveries from Nagoya University about how to make the material. So they developed their own system. And then they made another machine just to be able to do this positive and negatively charged regions. So you can have this combination and light coming out. And when you did this one, you had light coming out like a blue light. And this was actually the Nobel Prize in Physics year 2014. So it was given for the discovery of the blue LED and material. But the first development was made in the 70s, in the 80s. And then in 93, you had the first commercial blue LED. And then later on, when you used this one and you added the layer on top of the blue LED, which converted the blue to the other colors in the visible region, then you had white light coming out from the material. And then you had the white LED, and now it's so efficient that you can use this in lighting. So you can light up your rooms and so on. But from the beginning, it was research in the 70s, 80s, and then the technology developed. So it was not the plan from the beginning to have such type of technology, or how they did not know exactly what innovation routes they would take. They followed their interest and so on. And then a number of years later, it came into this revolutionary technology. And actually, the research I was talking about with Satoshi Kamiyama, he's from this group. So here you see in the center Isamu Akasaki, who's the original first researcher. And there were 3 researchers who got the Nobel Prize, and he was the one of the first ones. So we collaborate with them. So this is very nice. Another super nice thing about this LED innovation technology is that it is useful for the lighting purposes and so on. So that's good, and energy savings. But in addition, when you can modify the light, you can actually use this to demonstrate paintings and so on with different angles, and you can tune the colors much more when you combine the different colors from the LED. So you can decide to have a little bit more red or a little bit more blue, depending on when you construct these ones. Then you can actually see how the paintings and so on, the impression from them changes due to the lighting things. So then you come into other avenues of social acceptance of this new light and so on, and what you can use this for. And I live in the countryside, so I don't see so many of these buildings. But if you live in a larger city, you can see that the whole buildings can be lit out from LEDs. So this is one and the same type of same building, and then you have change of colors from different ones very fast when you have the LEDs. So then you can use this in other ways just to get the attention and so on. So this LED technology and innovations, they just spread out and do more and more. But of course, no one could from the beginning foresee which are the innovation routes you should do. Or, for example, this researcher, that he could imagine, I will use this new technology to study how the paintings can be perceived in different ways. So it was not possible from the beginning, but it emerged along the way, and then things combined. So this is another example, just that innovation routes are unpredictable. But if you follow your interest, you will find nice things. And what is happening now is that from the beginning, it was not a big plan to make these innovation routes, but now people are thinking more about it. How can we make more usefulness about these things? So this second researcher who got the Nobel Prize is Amano, and he was at the conference describing the blue LED and the technology and so on, and he explained all these things. And it took 30 years, he said, 30 years before we came into this avenue. And now the investors and the agencies, they would like to have new such type of technologies, but they want it in less than 10 years. It's impossible, but they want it. And I know it cannot be made. So then they are initiating ways how to make more usefulness from the findings and innovations. So for example, in Japan, he described that they have programs. So some of the students who are interested, if they want to become entrepreneurs, they should be encouraged, and there should be support mechanisms from the universities and from the governments to do this. So it's made systematically. And if someone is more innovative and wants to make an innovation, and then they should be able to develop a production technology, not only to make research findings to produce papers and publishing and so on, but to actually have production as a career path. And then there are investigators for students who want to make new technologies. Because we have some ideas, and Professor Amano has some ideas, but when the younger generation see these earlier ideas, they will get new ideas where they can be used in different ways. So this should also be encouraged, and that's also one of the motivations why I contribute with this webinar. My hope is to encourage some of you younger students to do more of these things and believe in yourself. So these are some examples, but at the end, this will be much dependent on yourself, on the person. So a few of my key messages, advices which I give from my experience, what I believe in, is that believe in yourself. If you like the things you're doing, continue to do it. Even though you might have some older generation saying that it was done 20 years ago, it did not work out, but now it's a new time. Maybe it will have relevance now, and you make a new discovery which you add on, and then you can make magnificent things. So continue to believe in yourself if you want to do something. It's nice to believe in yourself, but it's always a lot of work to do things. So then second thing is the partnership with some people where you create a team. So if you find a nice matching combination, then try to create a team. So you work together, then you can achieve much more. And when someone is tired, the other ones can help out. So that is also very much encouraged. Even though you have the original idea, you can get it going, but then you need to be a team to work together, because it will take a number of years before this is implemented. And maybe the original idea which you have with your innovation or innovation route is a good idea, but maybe no one wants to pay for it. So then it will not be used. I have an example from the mobile phone. The mobile phones from Ericsson, one of my friends was working there. So then they developed a very nice mobile phone many years ago, and it was nicest technological things which was developed, but no one wanted to buy it because it did not have the suitable design. So there will be opportunities which appear. So then if you are meeting people, spending time to do a network, then someone will say that, oh, your idea, this one, I like it here. I want to pay for it because it matches. And I don't want the full idea which you have. I want this part here. I will pay. And that you cannot predict or read about in the technical papers or so on. You need to meet people with previous history. So one of the innovation possibilities is that use the network and meet people. And at the end, because you're the younger generation, you decide how far you can reach. And this is a picture of my son who's constructing this tower, and he's fairly short, but he does not see the limit. And you can see he has managed to build the whole thing, and it's very unstable, but he managed to get there to that point. So this is also what I would like you to do when you do the things in the future. So I cannot say any particular advices on the innovation routes, but I want you to feel inspiration and then find out yourself. And maybe some of my sharing experience is useful or not, but you will also hear from other sources when you are active in these fields. So this is what I have been thinking about the innovation routes. And at the end, I'm sure that you can make some magic things. So you can use the force, like my son here is controlling this part of the tree. So I think you can do magic things also. So I hope the force will be with you also in the future when you do the innovation routes. So these were some examples from my point of view and presentation. So now I would like to have the interaction part. So we see we have some questions in the chat, and maybe there's someone asking. Have you seen?
Yes,
Have you updated?
maybe you can have a look while I say a few words. You can have a look at the chat. There are some questions. Yes, thank you very much, Mikael. Very interesting talk on your experiences and a good advice for the youngsters. You mentioned the Nobel Prize winners in physics from in 2010, and I see that people who are taking part here in Zoom joined our meeting. A lot of them are from Manchester, and it's an honor that these Nobel laureates are from Manchester, from the University of Manchester. Professor Andre Geim and Professor Konstantin, who have done excellent work and have gone, it's been 10 years now, are looking beyond graphene. And we have the Graphene Center here as well in Manchester. So it's a great honor for us to have these people working in graphene. And 10 years ago, you know, they won the Nobel Prize from doing groundbreaking experimental work in producing layers of graphene. And that was the method that they used was very, very simple, Scotch tape test method. So they put some kind of a Scotch tape on a bar of graphite material, and then they just took it off to get a layer of carbon, which was the graphene layer. And obviously graphene has a lot of applications. So the challenge was from being able to produce graphene at the lab to try to utilize this material with its unique properties so that we can have many, many different application areas. So it can serve in many, many different areas. So yes, and also if you remember that when the C60, carbon-60 molecule was developed, Professor Harold Kroto, the late Nobel Prize in chemistry with his colleagues, a lot of these discoveries that happen are accidental. So at the time, Professor Kroto was looking at some black carbon powder, you know, and then they came across this C60, and then they tried to think of the structure and then the applications, and you know there were Nobel Prizes that were given in this area. So sometimes, you know, you're doing some work and discoveries happen in accident, you know. So it's important for us to sort of bear in mind that people have won Nobel Prizes through accidents. So you know it's important. But like you said, it's important that the advice that you've given, that the youngsters need to believe in themselves, you know, believe in yourself. That's very, very important. and then to continue to work on any idea that you have, which you feel is innovative. So you continue to work in that. So if there's any research that you're doing, then you must continue. And there was a saying of Albert Einstein, who said that it wouldn't be called research if we knew what we were doing. So it's important that if you believe in yourself, continue to work, do research, create a team. Absolutely, you need people. You can't do everything yourself. So it's important to have a team, and then to network. And hopefully if we do that, and then things will be able to materialize. So did you go through the chat box, I think, or do you want me to read some questions out? Or?
No, I see them. So,
You
but
see them?
I fully agree with this, that because there are many discoveries made by mistake. So sometimes when I tell students, I encourage them to make mistakes, because then you will discover things. But don't break too many things, because we don't have that budget.
Yeah.
But this is also related to one question from Wakar Ahmed.
Yeah, Professor Ahmed.
Yes. How important do you think fun and creativity are in innovation? And I think this is extremely important or useful, because if you like what you do, then you will be more creative, and you will be thinking about things more when you sleep. You will wake up in the night thinking about some ideas which you got up, and then you will have bad sleep just because you're enjoying these things so much. But in order also to sustain over many years or do these things, then you should have fun and try to do as much creative things as possible. So I usually say that if I can have 50% fun and creative things, and then the other 50% is administration and other boring things, that is good balance. But I don't want 95% boring things and then 5%. So try to maximize it, but it will never be 100%, of course. But also the second part of the question here is that there's so much, everyone is focused on success and scared of failing. How important is failure in innovation? Like we already have examples that there are innovations which were failures from the beginning. We have like one material, I have given a couple of examples, and in Uppsala there's one material which they forgot over the weekend, and then when they came back they found that it was very absorbent. Now that they have a lot of opportunities from that. So it's okay to fail, and I think one should share the stories and experiences from failures. And like in my case, when I work with materials growth, my papers, they were on defects, the bad things, not the perfect material, because one never got. So that's how I got the publishing opportunities. But sharing these things, because someone will understand that, oh, you had this good idea, it did not work out for this purpose, but you can maybe use it here. So there is nothing which is failure. This is just learning, part of the learning.
Yeah, so we have quite a lot of people, or a number of people who joined us on Zoom today, who are in school, high schools, or in sixth form or early university. So there's a lot of youngsters out there, and from the school as well. So even from this age, from high school onwards, probably maybe you can speak a little on should they be thinking about innovation at this early stage, creativity, and what would you say?
Maybe they don't need to think about it purposely, but if they think about what they like to do, then they are certainly in either creativity part or innovation part. But it doesn't need to be like a plan from the beginning to think about these things. But maybe one does not need to spend so much time at the TV. If you have some activity which you like, you can do more of that, and it will give rise to possibilities.
But I remember that Professor Kroto, who was working quite closely with Nanosmart, and it was a colleague of mine, and he, the last several years of his life, he devoted to global educational outreach. He spent a lot of time focusing on the youth, on the youngsters. He would go and visit different schools and try to get kids to get interested in science, you know, in basic science. So because he discovered this C60 molecule, which revolutionized the world, he was going around making these models of buckyballs, you know, C60 molecules, and kids were playing around with it, putting it on top of their heads and everything. And he would go around the world, in Japan, in Asia, and in different parts of the world, just to get kids interested in science. Because with science, innovation, you're speaking about innovation. When you innovate, you're in a way solving some kind of a problem, you know, that we face. So it's always good that kids, I feel, that even from the school level, are interested in sciences and that, so that they can continue and go on and try to help to sort of solve some problem that will help society at large.
Yes, and then this is also where the networking comes in, because some of the problems you don't know about because you cannot predict the problems. But if you meet people who are telling about their problems, either in industry or their failures and so on, then you can, oh, my idea fits here. So then you can find a real problem to solve, not try to create the problem and so on. Then I think such inspirations like Professor Krota and so on. I remember I was at a school in 90s, end of 90s, for young researchers. So I attended, and he was one of the speakers there. So I still remember his enthusiasm about. So there's also a question here. Summarize what are the key stages of innovation are. I'm not sure there are any key stages, but there's a continued maturity of innovation. Sometimes you will figure out that this is not relevant at all for something, and then you need to put it on pause for a while. But if you continue to try to move ahead, then there will be a different stage, but it's more gradient than clear stages. So I cannot describe those more than that.
Maybe we'll take some question from some youngster. Maybe if you can type a question, or if you want to ask, you can unmute your mic and you can ask Mikael any question. Do we have anyone who wants to, any youngster? Or maybe even from Facebook. So if you're watching on Facebook, if you have a question, you can type your question.
While you check that one, I can take one here. Yeah, there are two questions. Okay. One, is it important to have a clear end goal as part of this journey for innovation? So I think it's good to have an end goal, but maybe that doesn't need to be rigid. So if you find out that it was a good to have this goal, but then you change the goal along the way when you have more information. So one of the environmental professors who I've listened to, he says that about the environmental technologies is that you cannot say which is the right route to do, but if you start with that, you have an intention to do these things to reach the goal, then you're moving ahead. And then also this relates to the second question, how do you stay resilient and motivated even during failure? Because if you have a rigid goal, then you will be disappointed when you don't reach it. But if you follow the dynamics of the goal, then you always are up to date what is relevant for this goal, and then you can adapt it to the reality, and at some point it will be some type of implementation, or someone will use it, or someone will get inspired by your efforts and do their thing, and they will succeed. So having not too rigid goals, is also part of how you can maintain and be motivated even when you fail. And remember that all the failures are also learnings. Like in business, some other people, they will not employ a CEO or someone unless they have failed a couple of times with something, because then no one is perfect all the time from the beginning. So failures are part of life. Like when we are learning to walk, we get up and then we fall, and then we get more and more mature. So it's not a failure to fall down, it's a learning process. So this is the same thing here.
Do we have any other questions? Any of the youngsters? I think we have reached, it's 12 o'clock now, 1 o'clock in Sweden.
We can take, there's
maybe,
one question here which I see, so I can take it while I have it.
And then I think I will also ask my Professor Waqar Ahmed, maybe if you could come in after you've taken this question to have some kind of an input into this discussion that we're having. And
yes,
then I think we'll wrap it up then. Okay.
Yeah, he has a question here, so if you
okay,
maybe he can ask it, because he's asking about resources.
Professor Ahmed, would you like to unmute your mic and then maybe say something if you would like to, and maybe if you could turn your camera on as well so we can see you.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Well, maybe if you could turn it'll be nice to see you as well.
Just 1 second.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to ask and perhaps comment on is, you know, a lot of the universities, they think innovation comes from getting lots of research funding and getting lots of money and money and money. They're all focused on getting money and ideas that they're going to work. But what we learned from our forefathers that came into this country is they were all entrepreneurs. They had very, very little resources, but they wanted to make a difference to their families in their own home countries. So they developed this resourcefulness to do new things to try to generate income. And a lot of them were very successful. So when you're coming from a position of need and desire and hunger to try to succeed, you will find different innovative ideas. So a lot of them set up businesses and everything without any business experience. So I used to study in Glasgow, and there was a Pakistani business person who had the biggest cash and carry in Europe in them days. And he could not read, he could not write, but he had this strong desire to succeed. So in one day, he opened a corner shop next to a big co-op. And what happened is he's trying to compete with the co-op. So the co-op manager and this owner got into a price war. So the co-op manager reduced the prices of milk and bread and the staple products. And this guy, again, reduced his prices, and the co-op manager reduced it further, and he kept going down and down and down until there were pennies. Then the manager of the co-op came to him and said, look, let's come to some kind of truce. I'm losing thousands of pounds a week, you're losing thousands of pounds a week. Let's come to a deal and fix the price. And this gentleman said, oh, I'm not losing any money, I'm only losing pennies. So he goes, how come you can't buy it cheaper than me? We've got, you know, the bargaining power to buy a lot cheaper than you. You're an individual owner, we've got multiple stores. He goes, no, all I do is send little kids to your shop, buy the milk and the bread and the eggs, reduce it by 1p, 1 penny, and I sell it. So I'm always going to be cheaper than you, and I'm only losing pennies. You might be losing thousands. So this thinking of creativity and innovation, they don't teach that in any business school, so you're probably never going to get it in an MBA program. But this idea and this desire and this resourcefulness, I think, is very important in innovation as well as coming up with the new technologies.
Yeah, I fully agree, because this is also, when you don't have the resources or the money, then you actually need to think more, and then you are probably more closer to thinking about the real problem. What is the need? And then you solve the need, and then you make money. If you would have all the resources and so on, then maybe you would imagine some type of problem that, and imagine that someone wants this, but it's not the real need.
Yes.
And also this is, I have the experience from in research when writing papers. So whatever we have been doing in silicon carbide, which is my field, is that we did something, and then we had a lot of resources to make experiments and so on. We had a good 90s. It was a very nice period of funding. But whatever we did, it was always some Russian people who had published something before. And they had much less resources, but they were doing much more thinking.
Yes.
So they used the resources they had, and then they made a finding. And then they made it like that. So while we were more running and doing experiments and not thinking, they were doing like the turtle, more systematic.
Yes.
So I think such things are very good because it resolves the actual needs. And when you ask, if you have a lot of money, you can pay a lot of people to do things, but many of them, or several of them, will not be doing any useful things.
Yes.
But if you collaborate under poor means, you find out who are actually working with you and doing things, and then you focus on them, and then you have your successful team.
Yeah. I think you made an important point about networking, because if you look at, say, different fields of activity, you look at physics, you look at material science, you look at business, a lot of developments are occurring at the interfaces between the two subjects. And that is our unexplored areas. And by networking and teamwork, you can actually, merge the two areas and work in this interfacial area where a lot of innovation can take place. Would you agree with that, or do you?
Yeah. So I have several times I've seen examples when you meet someone from a totally another discipline.
Yes.
But then what they do is very relevant because it's complementary.
Yes. Yes.
And then it becomes a better case. So this is why my preferred parts of conferences and meetings is the coffee, and maybe in the evening when it's social, that you eat and drink. Because then you meet people and you talk, and then you find out, not always, of course, but sometimes you find out, oh, there's a very nice matching here. Let's do this. So it's much more useful than the actual presentations, or these things. So that's why I also like this this type of interaction when you discuss and when you make it public. So maybe someone will listen to this or look at afterwards, and then they have some useful of, so being open and transparent with ideas.
Yes.
And also failures, then you create opportunities. So that's part of the networking or social networking, or whatever to call it.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Ahmed, for your input, for your contribution. Always very, very valuable to have Professor Ahmed, a lot of experience. Yes, I think we have a PhD student, I believe, join us from Algeria or so. That he or she has asked if there's any certificate of attendance to this webinar. Actually, this is the first one we're doing for the youth, so we're not going to be giving certificates of attendance for this one, but in the future we plan to have more webinars and events, hopefully once we get out of this lockdown, and then we'll be able to give some certificates. But for this particular one, there is no certificate of attendance being issued to the participants. I have left in the chat box, if you see, my email address. So if you have any feedback on the webinar or any suggestions, please do email me. We'll be happy to take your suggestions on board. And if the youngsters who have been listening in, please, if you can maybe type in there if you found it, was it interesting, the webinar, have you learned something, or if you have any questions you can ask, or just email me. I'm constantly in touch with Mikael, and we can reply, we can send you a reply as well through email or so. So I think now we've gone past our time. So
Yes,
I'd like
but
to
also I can add because this is something where we do to encourage people. So if you have ideas for the future, what more to do, so then we can adapt those ideas with future webinar or other exchange mechanisms. So if you have such activity or plan and so on. You can also email those suggestions, and then we can modify our attempts to create this type of exchange. So it would be very valuable to have such type of feedback for the future.
Okay, so thank you very much, Mikael, for a very interesting presentation on innovation. And as I mentioned, we will be bringing more such webinars to you in the future. And hopefully, you know, because they're webinars, we should be able to get people from different parts of the world to join in and to try to learn from their experiences. And hopefully the platform will serve a platform for all of us, and especially the youngsters, to actually network with each other. So once again, thank you very much for joining us, joining this Zoom meeting, and also those people who joined our live stream on Facebook. Thank you very much. I've not checked to see if there were any questions or so asked on Facebook, but I think, okay. The lecture, thank you. Okay, so there's not much question. People are just saying thank you and down on Facebook. So thank you very much, and
yes, thank you.
have a great day and stay safe. Thank you very much. Bye bye.